I never thought being a delivery driver would be a scary job. I mean, sure, I've heard stories about drivers getting robbed or attacked, but I never thought it would happen to me. That all changed one fateful night when I was making a delivery to a remote area in the countryside. It was already dark when I received the order. A large pepperoni pizza with extra cheese and a side of garlic knots. The customer's address was listed as Old Mill Road, which I had never heard of before. But I didn't think much of it and hopped in my car, eager to make some extra cash. As I drove down the highway, the streetlights grew further apart and the darkness seemed to swallow me whole. I turned on some music to calm my nerves and tried to focus on the road ahead. After what felt like an eternity, I finally reached Old Mill Road. The street was lined with tall trees, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the shadows. I followed the GPS directions to the customer's house, but as I got closer, I realized that there was no house in sight. All I could see was a long, winding driveway that led deeper into the woods. I hesitated for a moment, but then I remembered the tip I could potentially earn and decided to keep going. The driveway was bumpy and uneven, and I had to drive slowly to avoid damaging my car. As I drove deeper into the woods, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. The only sound was the crunch of leaves under my tires and the faint rustling of the trees in the wind. Finally, I reached a clearing where an old, run-down mansion stood. The paint was peeling, the windows were boarded up, and the once grand porch was now sagging and covered in cobwebs. I couldn't believe this was the customer's house. I checked the address again and it was a match. I got out of my car and cautiously approached the front door. As I reached out to knock, the door creaked open on its own. I nervously called out, "Hello? Pizza delivery," but there was no answer. I took a step inside and immediately regretted it. The smell was overwhelming, a mix of rotting wood, mold, and something else I couldn't quite place. I followed the smell to the kitchen, where I found the pizza box sitting on the counter. I was relieved to see that the customer had left the exact amount in cash, along with a generous tip. I quickly grabbed the money and turned to leave, but then I heard a noise coming from upstairs. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I should leave, but something compelled me to investigate. I cautiously made my way up the creaky stairs, the sound of my own footsteps echoing through the empty house. As I reached the top, I saw a faint light coming from under one of the doors. I slowly pushed the door open and was greeted by a sight that I will never forget. The room was filled with candles, casting a flickering light on the walls. In the center of the room was a large pentagram made of salt, and in the middle of that was a woman lying on the floor, her body contorted in an unnatural position. I screamed and stumbled backward, my mind racing with fear. But then she started to move, her head slowly turning towards me. I could see her face now. Her eyes were completely white, and her mouth was twisted into a sinister grin. I turned and ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached my car. I drove away as fast as I could, not daring to look back. When I finally reached the main road, I pulled over and tried to catch my breath. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. Was it some kind of sick prank? Or was it something more sinister? I didn't know what to do, so I called the police and reported what I had seen. They searched the house but found nothing. No candles, no pentagram, and no woman. They told me it was probably just a group of kids playing a trick on me, but I knew what I had seen was real. I quit my job as a delivery driver after that night. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, or the fear that I would come across that woman again. I still have nightmares about that night, and I can't help but wonder if it was all just a coincidence, or if there was something truly evil lurking in that old mansion on Old Mill Road. It was a dark and stormy night, cliché, I know, and I was making my rounds, delivering pizzas for the local pizza joint. I had been working there for a few months now, trying to make some extra cash while I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. Little did I know, this one delivery would change everything. I pulled up to the address on the order slip and immediately got a bad feeling. The house was old and run down, with peeling paint and broken windows. The porch light flickered on and off, casting an eerie glow on the front steps. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to just leave the pizza on the doorstep and run, but I needed the money. So, against my better judgment, I grabbed the pizza and headed towards the house. As I approached the front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I nervously knocked on the door, hoping the customer would just take the pizza and I could get out of there. But, to my surprise, the door slowly creaked open, revealing a dark and empty hallway. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response. I took a deep breath and cautiously stepped inside, trying to ignore the chills running down my spine. The smell hit me first, a musty, moldy odor that made me want to gag. I quickly scanned the room, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off, assuming the customer was just in another room and couldn't hear me. I made my way down the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The house was silent, except for the sound of my own breathing. I could feel my heart racing, but I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. That is, until I reached the kitchen. The room was pitch black, except for a faint light coming from the open basement door. I could hear strange noises coming from the basement, like something scratching against the walls. My heart nearly stopped as I saw a figure emerge from the darkness. It was a woman, or at least I think it was a woman. She was hunched over and her skin was pale and sickly looking. Her eyes were completely black and her hair was matted and greasy. She was staring right at me, a twisted smile spreading across her face. I wanted to run, to get out of that house as fast as I could, but my feet were frozen to the spot. I could feel her eyes boring into me, almost as if she was controlling me. I wanted to scream, but not even a sound would come out of my mouth. Suddenly, she started to move towards me, her movements jerky and unnatural. I could see something in her hand, a large kitchen knife. I knew I had to get out of there, but my body wouldn't listen to me. I closed my eyes, waiting for the worst. But, instead of feeling the sharp blade against my skin, I heard a loud crash and the sound of breaking glass. I opened my eyes to see the woman lying on the floor, her head in a pool of blood. The pizza box had fallen to the ground, its contents scattered everywhere. I didn't waste any time. I bolted out of the house, not even bothering to look back. I could hear the woman's screams echoing through the night, but I didn't stop until I reached my car. I sped away, not stopping until I was back at the pizza joint. I quit my job the next day and swore to never go back to that house again. But the nightmare didn't end there. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was still following me, watching my every move. I started having nightmares, seeing her face in my dreams. I eventually moved to a different town, trying to start fresh and forget about that terrifying night. But every time I see a delivery driver, I can't help but wonder if they have their own delivery driver horror story to tell. And I can't help but feel grateful that I made it out alive. I always thought delivery was a simple job, just driving around and dropping off packages. But that all changed when I started working for a small, local delivery company. It was my first day on the job, and I was excited to start my new gig. I was assigned to deliver packages to the outskirts of town, an area I had never been to before. As I drove down the winding roads, I couldn't help but notice how isolated and eerie the surroundings were. I arrived at my first stop, a rundown old house that looked like it had been abandoned for years. I hesitantly got out of my van and walked up to the front door. I knocked, but there was no answer. I shrugged it off, thinking the recipient must not be home, and left the package by the door. As I continued on my route, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Every time I looked in my rearview mirror, I felt like someone or something was following me. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there. My next delivery was to a large, dilapidated mansion on the outskirts of town. The driveway was overgrown with weeds and the windows were boarded up. I reluctantly got out of my van and made my way to the front door. As I approached, I noticed that the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and called out, "Delivery," but there was no response. I cautiously entered the mansion, my heart racing with fear. The inside was dark and musty, with furniture covered in white sheets. I made my way through the maze of rooms until I found the one I was looking for. The package was addressed to the master, and I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. I quickly dropped off the package and made my way out of the mansion, but as I was leaving, I heard a faint whisper coming from one of the rooms. I turned around and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was a tall, pale man with sunken eyes and a sinister grin. He whispered, "Thank you for the delivery," before disappearing into the darkness. I ran back to my van and drove off as fast as I could. I was shaking with fear and couldn't believe what had just happened. I couldn't wait to finish my deliveries and get back to the safety of the delivery company. But my next stop was the worst one yet. I arrived at a remote cabin deep in the woods. The door was already open, and I cautiously stepped inside. The cabin was filled with strange symbols and candles, and I could feel the presence of something dark and sinister. I quickly dropped off the package and turned to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. I tried to push it open with all my strength, but it wouldn't move. Suddenly, I heard a deep, guttural growl coming from behind me. I turned around to see a creature with red, glowing eyes and long, sharp claws. I was paralyzed with fear as the creature slowly made its way towards me. I closed my eyes and prepared for the worst when suddenly, the door burst open and my boss appeared. He grabbed me and pulled me out of the cabin, slamming the door shut behind us. He quickly explained that the cabin was owned by a group of cultists who had been known to sacrifice delivery drivers to their dark master. My boss had only arrived in time to save me because he had a feeling that something was wrong. I quit my job as a delivery driver that day and never looked back. I couldn't handle the constant fear and danger that came with the job. But to this day, I still have nightmares about that fateful day when I encountered the supernatural while just trying to make a delivery. And I warn anyone who will listen to beware of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of the delivery world.